Imagine a world where money literally grows on trees. A world where a rabbit costs 10 beans, a good turkey costs 100 beans, and the entire treasury of an empire is filled not with gold, but with sacks of fragrant brown beans. This wasn't a fantasy. It was the economic reality for millions of people in ancient Mesoamerica. Welcome to 10-Minute History. I'm your host, Jake Sullivan, and today we're uncovering the incredible story of how chocolate became currency and how an entire economy was built on the money that you could eat. Before a single cacao bean could be traded for a tomato, it had to be special. And what made it special began with the tree itself, Theobroma cacao. Its scientific name literally means food of the gods, a hint at the reverence it commanded. This tree is incredibly picky. It only grows in a narrow band near the equator, needing constant heat, high humidity, and the protective shade of taller rainforest trees. This meant the great highland civilizations, like the Aztecs in the Valley of Mexico, couldn't grow it themselves. Their homes were too high, too cool, and too dry. Cacao could only be cultivated in the hot, humid lowlands, creating a fundamental economic imbalance. The places with all the power and people had no cacao, and the places with cacao had less power. This scarcity was the first pillar of its value. But its value was also built on belief. According to Aztec mythology, the cacao tree was a gift to humanity from the benevolent god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. He brought the tree from the land of the gods, but this act angered the other deities, who tricked him and forced him to flee in disgrace. This story framed cacao as a divine substance, a piece of heaven on earth. To control cacao was to reclaim a divine legacy. The final piece of the puzzle was labor. Raw cacao beans inside the pod are bitter, perishable, and covered in a slimy white pulp. To turn them into a durable, valuable commodity, they had to go through a complex process. First came fermentation, where the beans and pulp were piled up for about a week. Microbes went to work, generating intense heat that killed the bean's germ so it couldn't sprout, and more importantly, it developed the chemical precursors for that rich chocolate flavor. Then, the beans had to be carefully sun-dried for 1 to 2 weeks, a risky process where a single rainstorm could ruin the entire batch. Only after all this effort did you have a durable, aromatic, and highly valuable bean. It was rare, it was sacred, and it was hard to produce. This was the perfect recipe for money. So how did it actually work in practice? Remarkably well. Economists say a good currency needs a few key properties. It must be durable, portable, easily divisible, and standardized. Thanks to that drying process, cacao beans could be stored for over a year. They were lightweight and easy to carry in sacks. And their divisibility was genius. The single bean was the smallest unit of account, the penny of the Mesoamerican economy. This meant you could have precise pricing for even the smallest items. In the massive market of Tlatelolco, the commercial heart of the Aztec Empire, a single fresh tamale or a large tomato would cost you exactly 1 cacao bean. For larger transactions, people simply used standardized counts. The Aztecs used a base 20 system. A zontal was a count of 400 beans. A sicapilli was a sack containing 8,000 beans. And a carga, or a porter's load, contained 3 sicapillis for a total of 24,000 beans. This wasn't some primitive barter system. It was a sophisticated, multi-tiered currency that allowed for complex accounting and fueled the daily transactions of millions of people, from the poorest farmer to the emperor himself. The Aztec Empire, in particular, ran on a river of these beans. Their primary source of income was tribute, a tax demanded from conquered provinces. Our best record of this comes from the Codex Mendoza, a document created shortly after the Spanish conquest, which lists everything the Aztec provinces had to pay. The cacao-growing regions, like Soconusco on the Pacific coast, were forced to pay a staggering tribute. That province alone had to send 400 cargas of cacao to the capital every year. Let's do the math on that. 400 loads, each with 24,000 beans, equals 9,600,000 beans. And that was just one province. In total, the Aztec treasury received an annual tribute of at least 980 cargas, which is nearly 24 million cacao beans. To put that in perspective, a modern high-quality chocolate bar uses about 70 beans. So Moctezuma's annual tribute was the equivalent of over 336,000 chocolate bars. This massive hoard of brown gold was stored in the imperial treasury, where it was used to pay soldiers, fund public works, and, of course, supply the emperor's court with thousands of cups of the elite chocolate drink. But wherever you find valuable money, you also find people trying to fake it. And the existence of widespread counterfeiting is actually the best proof of how valuable and trusted cacao currency was. Spanish chroniclers recorded the ingenious methods used by Aztec counterfeiters. One common trick was to take an old, shriveled cacao bean, carefully cut it open, and fill the hollow shell with dirt or a paste made from avocado pits to give it the right weight. Then, they would skillfully glue the shell back together. Another method involved taking worthless seeds of a similar size and coating them with a reddish-brown clay to make them look like the real thing. Of course, experienced buyers in the market knew what to look for. They would check the smell, the color, and the feel of the beans. If a batch seemed suspicious, they would break a few open to check. And getting caught was serious. The market had its own judges, who would punish counterfeiters by publicly beating them and confiscating their goods, ensuring that public trust in the currency was maintained. This entire intricate world was shattered by the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century. The initial encounter revealed a fundamental clash of values. When the Spanish conquistadors were shown the Aztec treasury, they were confused. They found rooms piled high with cotton cloth and massive sacks of cacao beans. They saw it as a warehouse full of supplies, not realizing they were looking at the Aztec equivalent of a national bank, holding the liquid assets of the empire. But in a stunning act of pragmatism, the Spanish didn't immediately get rid of the system. They had a shortage of their own metal coins, so for several decades, they officially adopted cacao as a currency in the new colony. They collected tribute in beans and paid native laborers their wages in beans. An official exchange rate was even set in the 1550s. 140 cacao beans were equal to 1 Spanish silver real, but this hybrid system couldn't last. The Spanish themselves caused the cacao crash. First, they dramatically expanded cacao plantations using forced labor. This flooded the market with beans, causing massive inflation. Second, as the Spanish Mint in Mexico City produced more and more silver coins, this new, more durable currency began to dominate the economy. But the most devastating factor was disease. European illnesses like smallpox wiped out as much as 90% of the indigenous population. This catastrophic collapse destroyed both the skilled labor force that produced the beans and the massive consumer base that used them as currency. The market simply evaporated. By the early 17th century, the great cacao economy was over. The bean's role was permanently changed from a sacred currency to a global commodity, especially after the Spanish added sugar and exported the drink to Europe, where it became a sensation. So what should we take away from this incredible story? The history of cacao currency proves that the idea of money is a cultural invention, one that can take many forms. It reveals a Mesoamerican world that was not one of simple barter, but of complex, currency-based economies with sophisticated accounting and regulation. The legacy of this system is still with us. The words cacao and chocolate come directly from the ancient Mayan and Aztec languages. And in a darker echo, the story of exploitation in the cacao fields, from Aztec tribute to the modern-day struggles for fair trade, reminds us that the quest for this valuable bean has always been linked to power and inequality. The money that grew on trees is a powerful lesson that value is never just about function. It's a product of ecology, labor, politics, and above all, belief. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know down in the comments. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please give this video a like. And don't forget to subscribe to 10-Minute History for more deep dives. Thanks for listening.